Story number 1. The Woman Under the Ice. There's a hush that settles over Lake Placid in winter, a hush that creeps in with the first thick snowfall and never quite leaves until spring's thaw. My wife, Kara, and I discovered that hush firsthand the December we rented a secluded cabin by the lake, seeking a peaceful holiday away from the city. We pictured crackling fires, steaming mugs of cocoa, and the crystal hush of a frozen paradise. We got more than we bargained for. We arrived late afternoon, the sun dipping behind the mountains, painting the sky in swaths of purple and orange. The cabin was postcard perfect, 2 stories of rustic wood, pitched roof, a wraparound porch, all perched on a bluff overlooking the lake. The water glinted steel gray under the winter light, shards of ice forming at its edges. The place was modern enough inside, central heating, a generator for backup power. The owner, whom we'd only spoken to by phone, assured us it was well maintained year-round despite its isolation. The nearest neighbor was at least a mile away, a small caretaker's house standing empty in the off-season. Perfect, we thought, for a cozy getaway. Kara busied herself unloading groceries while I made sure the furnace was running strong. The cabin's interior beams glowed in the warm lamplight, the walls hung with old photos of the lake in different seasons. Something about the images felt older than the frames suggested, though. One photo showed a woman standing on the edge of the lake, hair pinned up in a 1930s style, her face turned from the camera. Another displayed the cabin from decades ago, an old rowboat pulled ashore. I shrugged off the faint goosebumps that rose on my arms and chalked it up to the chill in the air. That night, the first big snow arrived, swirling flakes in the darkness. We peered out the wide living room window at the lake, now obscured by gusts of white. The lights flickered a couple of times but stayed on, to our relief. We curled up on the couch, letting the storm lull us. The wind howled around the corners, and I found it oddly comforting. Kara fell asleep against my shoulder. I might have dozed, too, if not for a shape I glimpsed outside, a fleeting silhouette crossing the snow behind the cabin. I jerked upright. The figure was gone. I told myself it was probably just a swirl of snow or my imagination. Tired as I was, I convinced myself it was nothing. At dawn, we woke to an ethereal landscape, at least a foot of snow draped every surface, the pines by the lake bowed under the weight. It was breathtaking. Kara wanted to snap pictures, so we bundled up, stepping off the porch into the crisp, powdery drift. The hush was so profound we heard each other's breath. Then she saw them first, footprints in the fresh snow. Footprints that led from the side of the cabin's living room window around to the back, continuing into the pines. Not animal tracks, these were human, distinct. And large enough, presumably an adult. We stared, cold stirring in our bellies. No one else was around, our caretaker wasn't due for another week, the neighbors gone for the season. Maybe a hiker or fisherman passing by. Kara offered. I frowned, scanning the property. A fisherman in the middle of a night storm? Unlikely. The tracks were too crisp, too purposeful. They're from late last night or early morning, I said. Maybe checking if the cabin was occupied? I felt a twinge of fear that we'd been spied on through the window. Kara shivered, pulling her coat tighter. We followed the footprints out of curiosity. They circled behind the cabin, paused near a back window, then angled toward the lake. Partway through the orchard of bare-limbed apple trees, the tracks abruptly ended, just vanished, as if the person had flown away. The snow beyond lay pristine, unbroken. We looked up, scanning the branches overhead. No sign they'd climbed a tree. We circled, searching for a doubleback. Nothing. The footprints simply disappeared. A chill of unease settled over us. We retreated indoors, locking the doors. The day passed quietly as we cooked a big breakfast, read by the fire, tried to shake the oddness. By evening, the sky clouded again, threatening more snow. We'll just keep an eye out, I said. We felt foolish, but decided to wedge a chair against the front door, just in case. That second night, I couldn't sleep. The wind battered the windows, a plaintive wail. Around 2 a.m., I dozed, slipping into uneasy dreams of footsteps crunching through snow. Kara nudged me awake, whispering fiercely, "Do you hear that?" Indeed, from outside, a faint scraping. Then a muffled knock near the living room. My pulse hammered. We parted the curtains, saw nothing but swirling flakes. The porch light glowed, revealing empty steps. Another knock, from the backside of the house. We raced to that window, again, nothing. We felt like mice in a cage, something circling outside. The knocks continued, shifting from window to window, never revealing the intruder. Fear twisted in our gut. Then, just as abruptly, the noises ceased. We spent the rest of the night tensely awake, ears straining. Dawn arrived, pale and cold. Summoning courage, we trudged outside in boots and coats to check for footprints. Sure enough, fresh tracks looped around the cabin, pausing at each window. We followed them out onto the frozen lake's edge. The tracks led onto the ice and vanished a few yards from shore, as if the walker sank into the lake itself or soared away. My heart pounded. The ice near there looked solid, so if they fell in, we'd see some break. But no sign of a break. The footprints ended at an unbroken expanse of white. We felt deeply spooked. We tried calling the local sheriff, but the phone lines were spotty, the cell signal non-existent. The landline in the cabin gave only static. Stuck in a winter wonderland with a prowler, or something worse. That evening, I discovered a battered old ledger in the cabin's loft. Leafing through the yellowed pages, I found entries dated 1910 to 1925. It seemed like a diary of an earlier occupant, describing harsh winters, daily chores, references to a neighbor named Margaret who drowned in the lake under mysterious circumstances. The final entry, her spirit roams the shore each winter. We see her footprints across the snow, leading to the water. She beckons for others to join her below. We must be vigilant. She wants more. A thunderbolt of fear. Could it be the spirit of that drowned woman haunting the cabin? The logical side of me resisted. But after the footprints and vanishings, I couldn't dismiss it. I showed Kara. Her face turned pale. "We have to leave," she said. "Can't we just drive out?" The roads, though, were choked with snow. We had an SUV, but the forecast promised heavier storms. Still, we decided to try in the morning, ignoring how we'd likely get stuck. Better stuck in a ditch than trapped with a ghost, I thought. That night, the storm hammered the cabin, snow piling high around the porch. The knocks returned, more insistent. We cowered in the living room, shotgun in hand. The cabin's owner left a rusted old shotgun in a closet, presumably for pests. The knocks escalated to banging, rattling the windows in their frames. The lamp flickered. We glimpsed movement outside, a tall figure, or sometimes multiple shapes, 1 second at the kitchen window, the next at the bedrooms. We heard a woman's voice on the wind, faint as a sigh. "Please, let me in." The accent was old-fashioned, each word thick with sorrow. My throat clenched. So the drowned woman was real? Around midnight, the doorknob jiggled violently. I rushed to brace it. The door pounded once, twice, then silence. My breath formed clouds in the chilly air. The furnace had died again. The hush lengthened. We dared breathe a sigh of relief. Then a voice, right next to the front window, "I'm so cold, help me," an echoing wail that made my skin crawl. I parted the curtain an inch. A woman stood mere inches away, hair dripping with water, eyes wide and pleading, lips a dark shade of blue. She wore a soaked dress from a bygone era. Our gazes locked. A wave of sorrow and terror crashed over me. Then she vanished. We got zero sleep, hearts pounding. Dawn arrived bleak and pale, the storm lessening but still swirling flurries across the yard. The drifts near the porch climbed waist-high. "We're leaving," Kara said. We crammed essentials in backpacks, donned heavy coats. The SUV was half buried, but we'd shovel it out if we had to. Stepping outside, we found footprints again, a single line from the lake to our door. Leading away from the water was the same. The lake itself, glimpsed through the pines, lay partially iced. My stomach twisted recalling the ghost's drowned face. We spent an hour digging out the SUV's tires, clearing enough path to turn around. Then, as I started the engine, we heard a gentle knock on the driver's side window. That same drowned woman's face peered in, her hair plastered to her skull, eyes unnervingly bright. She mouthed, "Come with me," though no sound emerged. Kara screamed, "Drive." I floored it, but the tires spun on ice. The woman pressed her cold hand to the glass, leaving a watery imprint. She began to fade, or maybe she stepped back. My mind reeled. The SUV lurched free, and we inched down the snowy driveway. The whiteness swallowed the road. We navigated slowly, paranoid about sliding into a ditch. The wipers flailed at swirling flakes. 3 miles on, we heard an unearthly shriek from behind, echoing across the pines. The ghosts or spirits were chasing us. I pressed the gas, the SUV fishtailing. We nearly careened into a tree. The shriek dissipated, replaced by the hush of wind. We made it to the highway by midday, physically trembling from the ordeal. We drove straight home, not daring to look back. On the second day back in civilization, Kara found watery footprints in our apartment's hallway, leading from the door to our bedroom. We nearly lost our minds. The footprints vanished after an hour. Over the next week, the phenomenon repeated, the faint smell of lake water, glimpses of a shadowy figure in a reflection. As if the drowned woman had latched onto us, yearning to complete her curse. In desperation, we contacted local historians near Lake Placid. One old archivist believed our story. He said a young woman named Margaret drowned there decades ago in midwinter, possibly after being jilted or cursed. Her spirit was rumored to haunt winter visitors near that specific cove, enticing them onto the ice. Some vanish each year. The archivist recommended a cleansing ritual or returning to the property to break the bond. The mere idea of going back made us quake, but we wanted to rid ourselves of her presence. So we returned in late February, hearts pounding, carrying candles and an old prayer the archivist gave us. The cabin was vacant, the snow deep. The presence was immediate. Every step we took, we felt unseen eyes. At the lakeshore, we lit the candles, though the wind threatened to snuff them, and recited the prayer. I can't recall the exact words, only that it begged peace for restless souls. The wind whipped around us, a swirl of snow. We saw her, Margaret, rise from the shore, face contorted in sorrow, arms outstretched. As we finished the final line, she let out a piercing cry that shattered the stillness. Then she faded, as though dissolving into swirling snow. Silence fell, heavier than ever. The presence lifted, the lake's surface calm. We left in tears, relief mixing with lingering dread. Since then, the watery footprints haven't reappeared, no more knocks in the night. We hope her spirit found rest, or at least unlatched from us. But part of me remains haunted by the memory of her face, and the possibility that some other winter traveler might smell that sweet rot of drowned lake water on the breeze, only to see footprints in the snow leading from the lake, beckoning them to a watery doom. So if you venture to Lake Placid in winter, and rent a lonely cabin on the shore, keep an eye on the ice and an ear open at night. If you see footprints that vanish into the forest or lead onto the frozen water, know that a drowned woman's spirit may roam, seeking companions for her endless, cold fate. And once she sets her gaze on you, no locked door or blazing fire can fully shield you from her sorrowful summons. Because in that hush of falling snow, the boundary between life and death is thin, and the lake spirit lingers beneath the ice, waiting for the next soul to claim. Story number 2. The scratches on the timbers. Sometimes, the old-growth forests and lonely peaks of the Pacific Northwest conceal more than just pristine snow and whispering pines. Sometimes, they hide ancient shadows that stir when winter's hush lays thick upon the land. We never believed that, at least not until the storm trapped us in that cabin near Mount Hood, where something waited in the blizzard's howl, hungry for our souls. My name is Eric Mortensen, and if I make it out of here alive, I want there to be a record of what happened to me and my friends. We came for the snow, ironically enough, 6 of us in our 20s, driving up from Portland in a caravan of 2 cars loaded with snowboards and good whiskey, itching for a long weekend of powder runs and cozy nights by a fireplace. The cabin belonged to a family friend of Riley's, perched in a remote nook off a logging road near Mount Hood's eastern slopes. We expected a rustic retreat, big wooden beams, a stone fireplace, minimal cell service, and all the freedom we craved. We got exactly that, plus something else we never asked for. It was late December, right after Christmas, when we arrived. The roads were decent at first, but as we climbed higher, the wind picked up, scattering flurries across the asphalt. By dusk, the sun sank behind thick clouds, and the temperature plummeted. Our phones buzzed with winter storm warnings. But we were too close to turn back. The cabin was maybe an hour away, if we navigated carefully. Sure enough, by the time we spotted the cabin lights through the forest, snow was already accumulating, swirling in the headlights. We parked on a gravel pad, shifting around in stiff jackets, breath steaming in the cold. The cabin looked postcard perfect, a 2-story timber structure, pitched roof, a wide porch, big windows. Riley rummaged for the spare key under a loose plank by the door, as instructed by the owner, and we trooped inside. Flicking on the overhead lamps, we found a cozy interior with a big central fireplace, well-stocked woodpile, and a small but functional kitchen. It smelled of pine and old varnish. We were 6, me, Eric, Riley, the reason we got the cabin in the first place, my girlfriend Lucy, and our buddies, Mark, Holly, and Jade. We tossed our gear into bedrooms upstairs, rummaged up a quick dinner from the supplies we'd brought, then settled by the crackling fireplace. The wind outside howled, rattling the eaves. Mark checked his phone, no signal. Holly joked we'd be incommunicado, forced to talk to each other. We laughed, relieved to have a break from social media. Jade poured shots of whiskey for everyone, and we toasted to an epic weekend. That first night, we stayed up late, telling stories, the storm intensifying beyond the windows. The cabin walls creaked, as if the timbers braced against the wind. No one worried, though Riley insisted the cabin was sturdy. Around midnight, Mark swore he heard a faint scratching outside, but we laughed it off as the wind scraping branches. By 2 a.m., we collapsed into our beds, lulled by the warmth of the fire. Morning dawned blindingly white. The storm had dumped at least a foot or two of fresh snow, possibly more. The world outside was a swirling whiteness, trees half lost in drifts. Lucy and Jade squealed with excitement, powder day for snowboarding. But a quick check revealed we were essentially snowed in. The logging road was buried, the driveway impassable without serious plowing. And we had no plow. We'd come for a winter adventure, so no one panicked. We still had plenty of food and firewood, and the storm was supposed to ease by tomorrow, right? We spent the day playing board games, sipping hot chocolate, occasionally poking around outside near the cabin to measure the snow. By midday, the wind howled again, heavier. Another front blowing in, apparently. That's when Lucy found the first scratches on the outer wall, near the back of the cabin. She called me over, her voice uneasy. Long, vertical gouges, as if made by huge claws. They ran from the windowsill down to the foundation, fresh enough that the splinters of wood were still bright. Bear? Lucy ventured, though her eyes said she doubted it. The lines were too parallel, too deliberate. It almost looked like something trying to claw inside. We brought the others to see. Riley whistled low. We're too high for cougars and a bear in winter? They usually hibernate. Doesn't make sense. Mark proposed a big cat, but none of us truly believed it. The storm's roar drowned out further speculation, so we returned inside, deciding to keep an eye on things. Jade joked about a Sasquatch cameo, but no one laughed. Night fell again, and earlier, deeper darkness as the storm ramped up. The wind battered the cabin, sending howls across the eaves. We ate a quiet dinner, uneasy. Mark rechecked the scratch marks from inside, shining a flashlight through a window. Nothing but swirling snow. Then, around 9 p.m., the lights flickered. The overhead bulb pulsed, once, twice, then steadied. We had a backup generator, but we prayed we wouldn't need it. At 11 p.m., I was returning from the bathroom down the hall when I heard a faint scraping near the front door. Like nails on wood. My heart lurched, remembering the scratch marks. I froze, listening. The scraping paused, then resumed at the window next to the door. Light, methodical, as if something tested the barrier. Hey, guys, I hissed. The group hurried over, hush descending. The scraping stopped. We parted the curtains a hair, but the outside revealed only swirling snow. Then a single, harsh knock on the door. We gasped. Jade half laughed in disbelief. Someone knocking in this storm? Mark unlatched the door, ignoring Lucy's whispered plea. He opened it a crack. A blast of freezing wind hit us. No one stood there, just darkness and swirling flakes. The footprints we expected to see in the snow? None. A single set of claw marks etched into the door's surface, fresh. We slammed the door, hearts pounding. This was no bear. No ordinary predator. Some primal sense told me we were dealing with something else, something older than the pines. The cabin moaned under the wind, or so we told ourselves. But the night was rife with strange thumps on the roof, more faint scratching at windows. Sleep was impossible. We dozed in shifts near the fireplace, shotgun in Mark's lap, though none of us had real experience using it. By dawn, the storm raged on, intensifying to a near whiteout. We were effectively cut off. The scratches on the walls multiplied. Some near the roof's eaves, as if something climbed. We found shards of wood littering the porch. Jade swore she saw a hunched figure watching from the tree line before vanishing in a swirl of snow. Morale plummeted. We needed a plan, maybe a call for rescue. But zero signal, landline was non-existent here. Midday. The wind's pitch changed, deeper, almost a mournful howl. Holly said she glimpsed a face pressed against the window, a pale visage with sunken eyes, lips drawn back. But when she screamed, Mark rushed over, found nothing. Another set of claw marks, though, raked across the glass. A thick tension descended. We felt hunted. That evening, the lights flickered again, then died. The generator kicked in, providing minimal power. The darkness outside the windows felt alive. We barricaded doors, hammered nails into boards, anything to reinforce. The entity, if it was real, seemed unstoppable, but we had to try. Around midnight, a new assault began, pounding on the walls, each side of the cabin, as if multiple creatures hammered in unison. The roof groaned. We cowered in the living area, the shotgun across Mark's lap, knives or makeshift weapons in others' hands. In the flickering lamplight, we saw the corners of the room stretch with dancing shadows. The pounding escalated to a frantic tempo, rattling the very timbers. Then it ceased, replaced by silence so sudden our ears rang. We barely exhaled when a low whisper seeped through the cracks. "I hunger," repeated, a voice that sounded like wind over broken glass. Lucy clutched my arm, trembling. The voice rose to a hiss, "Give your souls, come to me in the snow." Each word hammered terror deeper into our chests. Then the worst part, the boards we'd nailed over windows began to peel away, as if forced from outside by an invisible pressure. The nails squealed. Oh God, Holly sobbed. The door handle rattled, on the verge of snapping. We braced ourselves, bracing furniture. The entity roared, a sound that blended wind and raw fury. We realized with horror it planned to break in, or at least flush us outside. In desperation, I recalled local lore about Mount Hood, tales of an ancient spirit devouring lost travelers in winter storms. The older tribes spoke of a demon that fed on fear. Maybe we had to stand our ground, not show fear? But that was near impossible. My knees quaked. Suddenly, Mark shouted, "We can't stay cooped up. Let's outrun it in the storm, find the road." The group stared at him, half insane from panic. Jade argued we'd freeze or get lost. But the cabin was moments from being breached. Lucy found spare coats, we grabbed flashlights. The plan, dash out the back, try to push through the pines toward a known trail. Maybe we'd find a path or be safer among trees. The entity seemed to come from the open snow. Time was short. The boards on the front windows snapped, glass shattering. We glimpsed a pale clawed limb, inhumanly long, reaching in. The lamplight revealed gray flesh, jagged talons. Everyone screamed. Mark fired the shotgun. The blast echoed. The limb withdrew with a shriek. We seized the moment, flung open the back door, and rushed into the swirling white night. Instantly, the cold slammed into us, wind biting at exposed skin. Snowdrifts nearly waist-high. We forced our way around the cabin, the wind stinging our eyes. The entity roared behind us, an unearthly wail. We glimpsed a tall shape at the corner of the cabin, black against the white storm. It lunged, arms outstretched, but we dodged into the pines, heart racing. The next hour or so was a blur of trudging, stumbling through the dark, flashlights struggling to pierce the snow-laden air. The wind howled like a living thing, pushing us back. We tried to keep a single direction, leaning on each other. The forest creaked, branches sagging under heavy snow. Every so often, a hiss or growl echoed behind us. Once, Jade cried out, pointing to a shape gliding between the trunks. We pressed forward, teeth chattering, praying we'd find a clearing or a sign of the main road. Then we burst into a small clearing. In the middle, a shallow depression in the snow that revealed an old ring of stones, a fire pit, or some ancient site. We paused, gasping for breath. The entity's voice whispered from all around, "No escape, feed me, your souls." Anxiety skyrocketed. The wind whipped the snow into stinging curtains. A flash of movement, the entity emerged from the pines, impossibly tall, skin like a dead gray winter sky, eyes black pits. The group scattered, screaming. It swiped at Mark, claws raking his parka. He cried out in pain, staggering. The entity hissed, turning to Lucy, who held up a feeble pocket knife. The creature bared rows of jagged teeth in a silent snarl. I found a flare gun in my pack, almost forgot it was there, a last resort for rescue signals. With shaking hands, I fired it. The flare lit up the swirling darkness, a burst of red brilliance. For a moment, the entity recoiled, shrieking. The sudden light stung its eyes, maybe. The rest of us seized the chance, pulling Mark, scrambling away. The entity howled, the snowfall parted. A faint glow in the distance, road lights? Our hearts soared. We dashed, ignoring fatigue, chasing that glow. The entity's roars faded behind us, drowned by the wind. Breaking through the final line of pines, we stumbled onto a plowed road, headlights from a distant snowplow bobbing. Relief overcame us. We flagged the driver, collapsing. The old snowplow operator took us in, radioed for an ambulance to check Mark's wounds. He asked about the cabin. We gave him a delirious half-version. He simply said, "Reckon you folks best not go back there." We never did. Our belongings left behind. The caretaker found the cabin ransacked, windows shattered, the door battered off its hinges. He refused to take any explanation. We told no official story about the monstrous entity or the claw marks. Some nights, the images still haunt me, the thing with its long arms, the freezing hush of that cursed storm. If you plan a winter retreat near Mount Hood, take care. If a blizzard roars outside, and you hear scratching at your walls, or see marks along the timbers of your cabin, remember our story. An ancient hunger prowls the white storms, seeking lost travelers to claim, prying open doors and windows with silent malice. And once it sets its black eyes on you, the howling wind becomes a dirge for your soul, lost forever in the swirling snows of that haunted winter. Story number 3. The Ever-Growing Cabin. They say it's easy to lose your way in the vastness of White Mountain National Forest, especially in winter, when the snow piles so deep that every trail becomes an uncertain path. My name is Harrison Wilcox, and if anyone is reading this, then maybe the story of what happened to us won't be lost to the swirling drifts of snow and time. Perhaps it'll serve as a warning, not all cabins in the woods are made of mere timber and nails. Sometimes, they breathe. We set out from Concord early in the morning, me, my wife Melody, and our 2 children, Alex, 13, and Tessa, 9. Our plan was a simple holiday break, a short camping trip in the National Forest, a taste of winter wonder before returning to the bustle of everyday life. We'd done our research, or so we thought, picking a safe route that meandered around the forest edges. We had a small SUV loaded with supplies, food, bedding, a propane heater, plenty of warm clothing. Enough for a few nights in the wilderness. We had no intention of staying in a cabin, we had our tents. But fate had other ideas. The drive-in was idyllic, fresh snow blanketed the pines, the sky a bright January blue. The roads were plowed decently, the ranger station maps verifying that the trail we wanted was accessible. Kids in the back seat, excited, teased each other about building snowmen. Melody joked about making s'mores if we had a safe campfire. The forest around us stood tall and serene, a silent kingdom of evergreens. But as the morning wore on, the weather turned, as it does in these mountains, clouds rolled in, leaden and threatening. By noon, a light snowfall started, By 1 o'clock, we were in a near whiteout. I pulled over to the roadside, near a sign half buried in drifts, uncertain if we'd missed a turn. The wind whipped flakes around us. We could try forging ahead, Melody said, scanning the map, but the ranger station's a ways back. We debated turning around, but the roads behind us were quickly icing. We'll find a safe spot to wait out the worst, I decided. In the distance, through the snow, I glimpsed what looked like a driveway or old logging path. We took it, creeping along at a snail's pace. To our surprise, after about a quarter mile, the path opened onto a clearing. There, perched among the pines, stood a single log cabin. Smoke curled from its chimney, an inviting sign. Maybe someone's home, Tessa said excitedly. We saw no car or footprints, but the cabin exuded a quiet warmth, yellow light glowing in the windows. My hackles rose a bit. Who'd be out here in this storm? But the kids were cold and nervous, so we decided to approach. I knocked on the stout wooden door. No answer. A second, heavier knock. Still no movement inside. Finally, I tried the latch. The door swung inward with a gentle creak, revealing a cozy interior, a single large room with a stone fireplace, flames dancing merrily, some rough-hewn furniture, and a small loft overhead. Everything appeared inviting, as if someone had just stepped out. The floor was dusty, though, and no footprints beyond our own. "Hello?" I called. My voice echoed back. No occupant. A warm fire, but no occupant. The kids were already out of the wind, shaking off snow. Melody peered around, hugging her arms. "Must be a caretaker or something," she said uncertainly. But the place felt disused, if not for that roaring fire. The logs by the hearth were partially burned. A kettle simmered on an iron stove, yet no sign of a soul. We chalked it up to luck. Possibly the ranger staff used it as a warming hut or an emergency shelter. The snow hammered the roof, wind howling. We decided to wait inside, at least until the blizzard let up. I shut the door, sliding the latch. Warmth seeped into our bones. That's how it started. We told ourselves it was a temporary refuge, just for a few hours. Time passed. The storm outside worsened, day turning to a murky twilight. The kids dozed in front of the hearth. Melody rummaged in a small cabinet for sign of a host, found dusty plates, some canned goods, ancient brand labels. We stoked the fire, grateful for the respite. Then Tessa gasped. She noticed that the room had a second door we hadn't seen before, next to the kitchen area. "Was that door always there?" she asked. I frowned. I could have sworn the wall was solid logs a moment ago. Melody tried the door. It was locked. The doorknob rattled, refusing to turn. She gave me a perplexed look. "Weird," she said. "Maybe it's a closet." But had it materialized after we arrived? My rational mind said we just missed it in our relief. The kids grew jumpy, but we calmed them. Night fell fully, the wind shrieked a banshee cry. The cabin lights flickered. That's when Alex pointed out something even odder. The living area felt bigger. The corners of the room seemed to stretch. The fireplace that was once centered on the back wall felt slightly off to the left now. "You're imagining it," I said, forcing a laugh. But I, too, sensed the shift, like the geometry of the cabin had inched outward. Uneasy, we decided to bed down for the night, expecting the storm to ease by morning. We found some cots folded in a corner, perhaps for guests. We laid them out, the kids together, me and Melody on another. Sleep came fitfully. The logs in the fire popped, the wind battered the walls. I dreamed of the cabin's logs groaning, expanding. Once, near midnight, I half awoke to see that door near the kitchen handle jiggle. In my groggy mind, I dismissed it, drifting back to uneasy sleep. Morning brought no relief. The storm raged, a foot of new snow piled against the door, half the windows blanketed. We were stuck. The kids panicked at the idea of winter storms turning lethal, but we tried to reassure them. The cabin had supplies, some old canned goods, stale crackers, water from the melting snow. The generator must be hidden outside, powering the single overhead light. Or maybe the cabin tapped some line. Hard to say. My phone was dead, no signal anyway. Melody's phone similarly useless. Over breakfast, rummaging through more cabinets, we found a battered journal tucked behind dusty pots. The entries were cryptic, notes about the cabin hungers, references to expansions, illusions. The final line read, "We are part of it now. Once inside, it never lets you go." My blood ran cold reading that. I showed Melody. Her face whitened. That's when Tessa piped up, "Why is there a hallway behind that door now?" She was pointing to the door near the kitchen, the one that had been locked. Now it stood ajar, revealing a dim hallway leading deeper into the structure, though from outside, the cabin had no such wing. We crept over, peering in. The hallway extended a few yards, ending in another door. Flickering sconces lit it. The kids huddled behind me, fear playing on their faces. The rational side of me screamed that it was impossible. The cabin from outside was small, just one main room plus a loft. But here was a corridor that shouldn't exist. Something inside me insisted we close that door, block it. But curiosity overcame us. Quietly, we advanced, me in front with a flashlight. The hallway smelled of old pine, a hint of something damp. The floor creaked underfoot. We reached the far door, found it locked from our side. The doorknob turned easily. Another step, and we stepped into a bedroom, fully furnished, a large four-poster bed, dusty sheets, a single small window showing swirling snow. None of this made sense dimensionally. The kids refused to enter, cowering in the hallway. Melody and I ducked inside, heart pounding. We found a trunk at the bed's foot. Inside were old clothes, a woman's gown from maybe the 1930s, decayed with time, an embroidered label reading Evans. The same name from the battered journal? We retreated quickly, leaving it be. The sense of being watched pressed on me. Returning to the main room, we discovered the living area had changed too. The couch was further from the fireplace, as if the room stretched. Another door now appeared on the opposite wall. Tessa started crying, "I want to go home," meltdown imminent. We tried to console her. The cabin's expansions were accelerating, each new door beckoning with silent menace. Our minds reeled. "We have to get out," I told them all. "We'll break a window and climb out if necessary." We rushed to the nearest window, tried opening it. It wouldn't budge. Even the glass felt like a single piece with the frame. Marking it with a knife left no scratch, as though the glass wasn't normal. The walls felt alive, warm to the touch. We hammered on them, hearing a faint resonance, like a drum. The cabin was no ordinary building. Something was breathing, shifting behind the wood. In desperation, we tried the front door, the one we came in. It was gone, replaced by a bare log wall. The porch windows? Also vanished, replaced by more logs. We were sealed in. The kids panicked. I tried to stay strong, but terror gnawed at me. Over the next hours, the cabin's layout continued to morph. Doors appeared and disappeared. Hallways led to new rooms, a dusty library, a cramped pantry, a narrow spiral staircase up to an attic with a single gabled window. The kids complained of hearing whispers from behind the walls, moans at times. The temperature fluctuated, sometimes blazing hot near certain rooms, freezing cold in others. At one point, we found a back corridor that led to a full second story we'd never seen from outside, a corridor lined with framed photos of previous tenants or victims, pale faces half lost in shadow. I recognized the woman from the trunk's photograph, hollow-eyed. The final frame was blank, a silhouette waiting. The message was clear: the cabin was claiming occupant after occupant, absorbing them. My entire being shook with dread. No matter how we tried to navigate, the main living area or the old front door was unreachable or changed. The cabin guided us deeper, hall by hall. We realized each new space was an echo of a life once trapped. We found children's toys in a nursery, men's suits in a dusty closet, diaries referencing attempts to burn the cabin. Nothing worked. The final pages always ended abruptly, scrawls of madness. Night fell again, though time was meaningless inside. The lights above flickered, as if the cabin decided when to illuminate. The kids dozed in a corner, trembling with nightmares. Melody and I kept vigil. A new door slid open, leading to what looked like a dining room set for a feast. The table bristled with dusty plates, old silverware. We heard faint clinking, as though ghostly dinner guests. Then it faded, replaced by another corridor. The cabin's illusions or expansions came and went, taunting us. Eventually, we found ourselves in a large chamber that might have been a grand foyer, though we never saw it from outside. The logs soared overhead, forming a vaulted ceiling. In the center stood a monstrous wooden growth, like a tree trunk sprouting from the floor. Embedded in the trunk were dozens of objects: rings, watches, scraps of clothing. Soul tokens? My stomach lurched. The trunk thrummed with a heartbeat-like rhythm. A voice or presence filled the air, a groaning, ancient whisper that we felt more than heard. It said, "Stay. You are part of me now." The kids screamed, huddling behind Melody. I brandished a fire poker we found, cursing at the phantom. But how do you fight living wood? In final desperation, we recalled legends from the diaries referencing a heart of the cabin. If we destroy it, maybe the curse breaks. So we approached the trunk, me raising the poker, Melody brandishing a hatchet we found in some storage room. The trunks would rippled, as if alive. Ice seemed to form in the grain, glaring with malevolence. We hacked at it, ignoring the kids' cries. The trunk let out a keening wail, the entire cabin shuddering. Splinters flew, a thick, dark sap oozed from the wounds. The walls around us bent, beams groaning, as though the cabin was in agony. We pressed on, hacking deeper. A swirl of wind battered us, debris spinning. The overhead lamps popped in a shower of sparks. Darkness enveloped us, except for the faint glow of the sap, shimmering red. The kids cowered. With one final blow, Melody's hatchet sank deep into the trunk's core. A deafening shriek erupted, the sap spraying. Then, a blinding flash. The cabin lurched, floors buckling. I grabbed Tessa, stumbling backward. For a heartbeat, everything was chaos: roaring wind, splintering wood, the stench of ancient rot unleashed. Then silence. The lamp flickered back to life. We found ourselves in the original living room. No extra doors, no expansions. The front door was there again, wide open, letting in frigid air. The logs, scratched and battered, but stable. We shared disbelieving glances, hearts. The ever-growing cabin. They say it's easy to lose your way in the vastness of the White Mountain National Forest, especially in winter, when the snow piles so deep that every trail becomes an uncertain path. My name is Hugh Masters, and if anyone is reading this, then maybe the story of what happened to my family and me won't be lost to the swirling drifts of snow and time. Perhaps it'll serve as a warning: not all cabins in the woods are made of mere timber and nails. Sometimes they breathe. We set out from our home in Massachusetts early in the morning, my wife, Grace, our 2 kids, 12-year-old Lila and 9-year-old Brandon, and me, aiming for a weekend of winter fun near Mount Washington. The plan was straightforward: drive up to a cozy rental cabin we'd found online, spend a few days sledding, snowshoeing, maybe doing some mild hiking if the weather allowed, and then return. We wanted a break from the city crowds, some peace in the hush of a snow-blanketed forest. We should have known better. The forecast called for a mild storm, but by the time we reached the White Mountain region, flakes were swirling thickly, the roads growing slick. Afternoon turned to a twilight gloom under thick clouds. We saw a sign for a turnoff, Henley Road, the name matching the directions the cabin's owner provided. The unpaved lane wound among towering pines, the canopy overhead swaying in the rising wind. We found the cabin just as dusk settled, a 2-story log structure perched on a small rise. It looked welcoming at first glance: a rough-hewn porch, a soft glow in a front window, smoke curling from the chimney. Surprising, because we'd been told the cabin might need the furnace started from scratch, but we assumed the caretaker must have prepared it. The kids cheered, relieved to be out of the car. Inside, the cabin was toasty warm. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, its embers glowing red, as if recently stoked. The logs forming the walls smelled of fresh pine, despite the place allegedly being decades old. A hallway led to 2 bedrooms, plus a steep staircase to a small loft. Grace and I exchanged curious looks. Who started the fire for us? We found no caretaker around. The kids, though, were too busy squealing over the cool fort vibe to worry. We settled in, happy to have such cozy digs. That first evening was peaceful enough. The wind picked up outside, swirling snow forming drifts along the porch. We made pasta on the gas stove, then gathered by the fireplace, reading or playing card games. The kids were excited about tomorrow's planned sledding. By the time we tucked them in, the hush of the forest reigned, broken only by the whistle of wind. My wife and I dozed off in the main bedroom, lulled by the storm's lullaby. Around midnight, I awoke to a creaking noise, like timbers shifting. I assumed it was the wind stress on old logs. Another series of creaks followed. The cabin felt slightly bigger, though I dismissed that as a groggy notion. I drifted back to uneasy sleep. Morning brought a heavy snowfall still in progress, the outside world vanishing into white. The kids squealed with delight, dragging us out to see the drifts. We found the porch half buried, no caretaker footprints, no sign of life beyond the swirling snow. The trees stood like silent sentinels. We spent the morning near the cabin, letting the kids do mini-sled runs down a small slope, always keeping the cabin in sight. By noon, the storm intensified, driving us back inside. As we shed coats, I noticed the living room seemed off. The distances from the fireplace to the couch felt longer, the corners somehow more distant. My rational mind said it was just a trick of the eye. Mid-afternoon, the wind howled. Grace rummaged for board games in a closet near the kitchen, then she called me over, confusion etched on her face. "There's a new door in here," she said, pointing to a spot on the wall where she swore only shelves had been. Now, an old wooden door with iron hinges stood closed, as if it had always been there. We tested it. Locked. The handle didn't budge. The kids were intrigued, but I felt a cold prickle of dread. Houses don't grow doors overnight. We tried rationalizing, maybe we missed it, or it was hidden behind some boxes. But even rummaging old pictures from the cabin's listing, the door wasn't there. That night, as we huddled in the living area after dinner, the lights flickered. The wind outside battered the walls. Lila mentioned she thought the hallway to the bedrooms felt longer. We all teased her gently but shared uneasy glances. At midnight, a loud crack woke me. I stumbled out of bed, flicked on the hallway light. The floor creaked underfoot. Everything seemed normal, except the hallway did appear a foot or two extended, an extra stretch before the kids' room. My skin crawled. I scurried to check on them. They were safe, dozing. I returned to find Grace awake, anxiety on her face. "Something's weird with this place," she whispered. I nodded, hugging her. "We'll leave at first light," I promised. But by first light, the storm reached near blizzard conditions, dumping snow so heavily the cabin's ground floor windows were half covered. The door, half blocked by drifts, refused to open more than a crack. Grace and I tried to shovel from inside, but we had nowhere to put the snow. The phone we used for contact had no signal. We were effectively trapped. The kids tried to remain brave, but I saw fear flicker in their eyes. As the day wore on, the new door in the closet was found ajar. Inside was a short corridor leading to a small storage room with old boxes. The corridor ended at a second door, locked from the other side. The boxes contained random items, old Christmas decorations, a tattered journal referencing the cabin's living heart. I read a few lines. Someone wrote about expansions, illusions, how the cabin devoured families. My pulse hammered. Grace demanded we hide this from the kids to avoid panic, but we were panicking ourselves. Late that afternoon, Tessa found fresh scratches on one wall in the living room. For parallel gouges etched into the log, fresh splinters scattered. "Like claws," she whispered. Then the overhead light flickered. The house, was it damaging itself or something else? That night, we barricaded ourselves in the main room, piling furniture at the new corridor door in case it opened deeper. Outside, the wind screamed, or was that the cabin moaning? In the middle of the night, I heard the boards shift, the floor stretching. The kids whimpered. Grace gripped my arm. We felt the room distend, an excruciating sense that each log was elongating. Doors appeared or vanished at the edges of our vision. My breath caught in my throat. Lila sobbed that the ceiling was higher. And indeed, it was. The old iron chandelier now hung further overhead. The entire cabin was inflating like a living beast. Suddenly, the closet corridor door crashed open from the inside, like a violent push. Our barricade toppled. We saw a new corridor, much longer now, twisting away in gloom. A faint, wet breathing sound emanated from within, as though the logs themselves exhaled. Panic soared, but we had no route out. The front door was blocked by drifts, the windows unbreakable. We tried. The only path was that new corridor, beckoning with quiet menace. We lit oil lanterns, found in a cupboard, venturing down the corridor in desperation to see if it led to an exit. The kids clung to me, eyes wide. The walls around us had a pulsing warmth, as if the logs had flesh. Each footstep echoed hollowly. The corridor split into multiple halls, each lined with doors. Some doors led to empty rooms, others to bizarre mirror reflections of the living room or half-finished spaces with partial floors. In one room, we found a crib with a dusty doll, the same color as Artessa's coat. Another door opened onto a small staircase leading down, but the steps ended abruptly at a blank wall. Hours might have passed. The cabin was a maze, shifting behind us so we couldn't retrace our steps. The kids wept. The air grew stifling. Eventually, we stumbled into a large open chamber that might once have been an attic, sloping beams overhead. In the center stood a massive trunk of wood protruding from the floor, entwined with vines or roots. The sense of dread was crushing. The trunk pulsed with a dull glow, as though it was the cabin's heart. I remembered the tattered journal mentioning the living heart. Maybe destroying it was our only chance. We hammered at the trunk with whatever we had, lantern stands, a fireplace poker we carried. The trunk surface was tough, resin-like. Each blow made the cabin shake, the walls moaning in protest. A thick, dark sap oozed from cracks, reeking of rot. Tessa screamed that she saw faces in the trunk's bark, twisted expressions. The cabin roared, yes, roared, a deep, resonant bellow that vibrated the timbers. We hammered harder, ignoring splintered sap that burned our skin. Finally, a crack split the trunk, a sickening pop. The entire structure convulsed, floors tilting. We heard the logs outside snap or contract. The trunk shrieked in an unearthly tone, as if dozens of voices wailed at once. We hammered again, the crack widened. Sap sprayed, stinging our eyes. Then, with a thunderous jolt, the trunk caved in on itself, shriveling into black pulp. All at once, the corridor behind us collapsed to a single door. We stumbled out, choking on dust. We found ourselves back in the original living room, dimension normal again. The front door was there, unblocked. No sign of snow drifts. The lights flickered, then steadied. Outside, we glimpsed daylight, clear morning light, not the raging storm we'd known. The kids cried, half from relief, half from confusion. We flung open the door, stepping onto the porch. The yard was calm, a mild dusting of snow, no sign of the monstrous drifts. Behind us, the cabin's logs looked older, battered, as if caved in. It slumped, half ruined. We didn't question it. We rushed to our SUV, which was parked as if the storm never buried it. The path behind us was clear enough to drive. We piled in, took off down a road that seemed normal, no sign of the deep wilderness we remembered. We never looked back. Days later, I tried contacting the cabin's owner, only to find the phone line disconnected, the listing gone from the rental site. Locals swore no such cabin existed in that exact location. We can't prove what happened. Our photos and phone recordings are corrupted, images blurred. The kids have nightmares, still. Grace can't sleep without lights on. As for me, I wake up sometimes certain I hear logs creaking, expanding, as though the cabin hunts me still in dreams. So heed my words, if you come across an old log cabin in the White Mountain National Forest, especially in winter, and it feels larger inside than it should be, if new doors appear in the walls, if you sense that the building itself is alive, run. Because once you step into that living structure, it hungers to keep you. And only by striking at its cursed heart can you break free, if you're lucky enough to find it before the cabin devours your soul entirely. Some cabins stand forever in the hush of snow-laden pines, waiting for the next family seeking shelter, the next lost travelers who never realize what breathes behind the logs until it's too late. Story number 4. Reflections on the Lake. They said Lake Tahoe never truly sleeps in winter, that the waters remain a mirror to all that lurks in the frosty night. I never believed those rumors until the weekend we spent in that lakeside cabin, the holiday that became our worst nightmare. My name is Carmen Vogel, and I want to record these events while they're still fresh in my mind, before the nightmares blot out the line between memory and madness. There were 6 of us in total: me, my boyfriend Dylan, my best friend Sarah and her fiancé Marcus, plus Jackson and Tanya, an on and off couple who decided to join the getaway on a whim. We'd booked the cabin for a holiday break, some good times in the snow, maybe a bit of skiing at the nearby resort, plus the peaceful lure of Lake Tahoe's shoreline. The listing showed a cozy, rustic place with huge windows facing the lake's calm waters. Perfect for group dinners, board games, and slumber party vibes. We had no idea what waited for us behind those scenic photos. We arrived in mid-afternoon, just as the winter sun began dipping behind the Sierra Peaks, gilding the sky in pink and gold. The cabin sat near the lake's edge, perched on a slight rise with a wraparound deck, pine trees framing the front. The water below was crystalline, reflecting the snowy mountains. A hush hung in the air, broken only by the occasional breeze or the distant hum of the main road. Idyllic. Inside, the cabin was warmer than expected. The caretaker must have turned on the heat. We found a large living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchen stocked with basic utensils, and big floor-to-ceiling windows facing the lake. A spiral staircase led up to a loft area, presumably extra sleeping space. Tanya squealed with delight at the view. Dylan and Marcus hauled in the groceries, while Sarah set about picking bedrooms. I wandered to the glass, pressing my palm to the cold surface, admiring the lake's sheen. Dusk had turned it a deep blue. My reflection stared back, superimposed on that majestic backdrop. I felt a ripple of unease I couldn't name, just a fleeting sense that the reflection was ever so slightly off, as though my eyes in the glass were darker. I chalked it up to travel fatigue and shrugged it off. We spent that first night unwinding. Sarah whipped up a hearty stew, we opened wine, dimmed the lights, let the fireplace crackle. We played a silly card game, the guys argued about football. Everything felt cozy, normal. Around 11 p.m., we parted for bed, each couple to their chosen rooms. The wind outside picked up, rattling the eaves, but inside the cabin was a cocoon of warmth. I curled up next to Dylan, lulled by the hush of the lake outside the window, half seen in the moonlight. Sleep claimed me easily. But something woke me around 2 a.m., a soft tapping sound near the window. My eyes snapped open. The moonlight bathed the room in silver. Dylan was snoring gently, oblivious. I listened, heart quickening. Another tap, faint but deliberate, as if someone's knuckle rapped the glass. The window overlooked the deck facing the lake. I eased out of bed, creeping to the window. The blinds were half drawn, letting a slice of moonlit view. In that slice, I saw nothing except the shimmering black water beyond. The tapping had stopped. My reflection stared back at me. This time, it gave me the creeps. It seemed to lag, like if I moved my head left, the reflection needed an extra beat to follow. Ridiculous, I told myself. I was half asleep. I crawled back to bed, mind whirring. Morning arrived with bright sun glinting off the lake. Over coffee, I mentioned hearing a tapping. The group teased me about raccoons or tree branches. The day was busy. Dylan and Marcus tried ice fishing on the lake's shallow edge, while Sarah, Tanya, and I drove into town for groceries. Jackson lingered behind, claiming he wanted alone time to read. By afternoon, when we returned, Jackson seemed jittery. He said he kept seeing movement from the corner of his eye outside the windows, shadows that vanished when he looked straight. We teased him about cabin fever, but I saw real fear behind his eyes. That evening, we decided on a movie night in the living area, the big windows draped by curtains. We didn't want the black expanse of the lake spooking us. The wind had picked up again, swirling small flurries across the deck. Halfway through the film, I glanced at the window to see the curtains flutter, as though someone behind them tried to peek inside. My heart clutched. I paused the movie, telling Dylan. He whisked the curtains aside. No one there, just our reflection in the glass, the pale gray lake behind it. The group shrugged it off as my imagination. But soon after, the power flickered, plunging us into darkness for a few beats. The fireplace glow cast dancing shadows on the walls. In that brief flicker, I caught a shape at the window, a face, or the suggestion of one, pressed to the glass. Then the lights returned, and it was gone. My scream startled them all. I rushed to the window, scanning. The deck was empty, the swirling snow revealing no footprints. The group exchanged uneasy looks. Something was going on. That night, we all bunked in the living room, not wanting to be alone in separate rooms. We unrolled sleeping bags, built the fire high. The men insisted we keep watch in shifts. Dylan and Marcus took the first watch, the rest of us tried to doze. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a whispered argument. Dylan and Marcus hovered near the window. Dylan swore he saw someone standing on the frozen lake, just beyond the deck's edge. Marcus said he saw nothing. The cold tension in their voices convinced me something was out there. But we also saw no footprints, no sign of entry. Eventually, we dozed off again, none of us truly resting. In the morning, we discovered faint scratches on the outside deck rail, long grooves in the wood as though fingernails or claws had raked it. The group debated leaving, but a winter storm was forecast to hit that afternoon, making the roads hazardous. The owner had told us 4WD was necessary, but even with that, a big storm could trap us. We weighed our options. Sarah pointed out we'd only been here 2 nights, maybe we were just jittery. We decided to stay, but with an eye toward caution. If things got worse, we'd try the roads anyway. That day, Jackson decided to do some exploring around the property. I joined him, along with Tessa, to find any footprints or tracks. In the backyard near the water's edge, we discovered something else, reflections. Each time we looked at ourselves in the lake surface, the reflection seemed off, like an extra figure hovered at our shoulders, or our eyes in the reflection looked sunken. We stepped back, unsettled. The lake surface was partly frozen, shimmering in the midday sun. If we stared too long, we saw faces drifting under the ice, eyes wide with longing. Disturbed, we returned inside, telling the group. A hush fell. Dylan said, "No more going out alone." By dusk, the new storm approached. The wind rattled windows, the sky a darkening slate. We made dinner, trying to keep spirits up. That's when Tessa pointed to the living room window, saying calmly, "That lady is outside again." We jolted. "What lady?" Tessa just shrugged. "The one in the water, she's at the window." We looked, hearts pounding. Nothing there, just the swirling snow. Tessa insisted she'd seen a woman's face with sunken cheeks. Fear smothered us. The house's electricity blinked again. In candlelight, we saw silhouettes gliding on the deck, fleeting glimpses of figures in the swirling drifts. No footprints, no knocks. Then, after midnight, the entire group heard the voice, a faint whisper drifting from the windows, "Come out, come to the lake," repeating in a low, sing-song tone. It sounded like multiple voices overlapping. The kids started sobbing, covering their ears. The voices lured, promising warmth, belonging, a release from fear. Dylan pinned the door shut, and we all huddled by the fireplace, ignoring the siren calls. But the final straw came when the glass in the big front window began to ripple, as if turned liquid. Shadows pressed from outside, bulging shapes of hands or faces. The outlines were heartbreakingly human, but twisted, eyes hollow. The watchers tried to enter through the glass, their murmurs entwined, "Join us, drown with us." In total panic, we retreated to the kitchen, the children crying, the men searching for any weapon, a fire poker, a spare hatchet from the closet. We realized the spirits or ghosts wanted us on the lake to share their watery fate. The caretaker's mention of some drownings in the 1920s from the cabin's brief history suddenly felt all too real. In desperation, we decided to flee. The storm outside roared, but the alternative was to be possessed or coaxed onto the lake. We packed essentials, layered the kids in coats, and braved the front door. The wind nearly knocked us back. Snowdrifts towered, the driveway invisible. In the swirling gloom, we glimpsed figures drifting among the pines, half-transparent, eyes glowing faintly. Some extended ghostly arms toward us, beseeching. Others scuttled, faces contorted in silent wails. We forced ourselves forward, sinking knee-deep in powder. We reached the vehicles. The wind whipped at us. Dylan fumbled the keys, cursing. The tires spun on ice. The entire time, the watchers pressed closer, their voices rising, "Stay with us. We are lonely." The kids were hysterical. Finally, the car gained traction, lurching onto what was presumably the road. We crawled along, the headlights reflecting a world of swirling white. But the watchers glided after us, sometimes visible in the beams, sometimes flickering out. It was impossible, but they followed. At the lake's bend, we saw them last, a cluster of specters, some male, some female, some children, all with waterlogged eyes and dripping clothing, reaching out as if to pull us from the car. The wheels spun, we prayed the engine wouldn't fail. The watchers parted, letting out a collective moan. Then, they receded into the darkness. Once we cleared that curve, the road improved slightly, and we found our way to the main highway, hearts pounding. We didn't stop until we reached a small lodge miles away, stumbling inside at dawn. The staff stared at our wild eyes, our trembling limbs. They believed none of our story, chalking it up to shock from the storm. But the caretakers looked hinted he knew something lurked near that old cabin. We never returned for our belongings. The cabin's owner didn't respond to calls or emails. The listing vanished from the rental site. We occasionally search news from Lake Tahoe, some mention of a drowned woman's spirit or a cluster of ghost sightings, but find only vague local legends about illusions on the water at night. The children still have nightmares, painting pictures of pale faces pressed against windows. Lucy can't sleep without checking the glass multiple times. I dream of that watery reflection, the watchers beckoning us to share their cold fate under the ice. Maybe the cabin's next visitors will be less lucky. Because once the winter storms gather on Lake Tahoe's shores, the drowned souls behind the glass awaken, seeking new company. If you ever look out a lakeside cabin window at midnight and see silhouettes floating on the glass, do not heed their calls. They want you out there, under the freezing waters, to never return. And if you see fresh scratch marks on the door or footprints in the snow that vanish into the lake's black surface, pack your things, flee at once. Otherwise, your reflection might become just another face among the watchers, calling out to lure the next unsuspecting souls into the chill depths of Lake Tahoe.